Earlier this month, a drone flying into the Kremlin in what appeared to be a major security breach for Russia. Theories on what exactly happened.
Well, overnight into Saturday, Russia carried out a deadly large-scale aerial assault on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Ukraine's president said the attack saw some 500 drones and 40 missiles launched at Ukraine.
This wasn't about armor or firepower or holding a position. This was about 15 men on motorcycles who believed the oldest trick in warfare still worked. Move fast, hit hard, get there before the enemy can think. 3 minutes later, most of them were dead, and the trick didn't work anymore. To understand what happened on that stretch of Ukrainian dirt road, you have to understand what the Russian command was trying to solve. For months, armored vehicles had been burning across the same kinds of open corridors. Tanks that cost millions were being reduced to scrap by drones that cost a few $100s. Bradleys, BMPs, T-72s, it didn't matter. If it moved and it was heavy, it died. So someone in the planning chain had an idea that, on paper, made a certain kind of sense. Forget the armor. Forget the weight. Strip everything down to the fastest, lightest thing you can put a soldier on, and send them across the gap so quickly that the drone operators can't keep up. Motorcycles. Dirt bikes. Machines that could hit 120 kilometers per hour on a flat stretch and weave through terrain that would stop a tracked vehicle cold. The logic was almost elegant. A drone operator needs time to acquire a target, adjust the flight path, and close the distance. If the target is small and moving at highway speed, the window shrinks dramatically. Get enough riders across the open ground in a tight enough window, and some of them reach the trench line. Some of them get in. And once they're in, the position starts to fold. This wasn't a new concept. Motorcycle units have been used in warfare for over a century. The Wehrmacht used them extensively as reconnaissance and rapid exploitation forces. Special operations units in Afghanistan used ATVs and motorcycles to cover ground that vehicles couldn't reach. The Russian military had been experimenting with motorcycle-based assault tactics for several months before this particular engagement, and in some cases, they had worked. Not always cleanly, not without losses, but the riders had reached their objectives often enough that the tactic kept being used. It was cheap, it was fast, and it solved the specific problem of crossing the kill zone that drones had created around every armored approach. The unit that assembled on that morning was not improvised. It was structured with deliberate thought about the threats it would face. More than 15 riders formed the spearhead, spread across lightweight motorcycles and carrying only personal weapons and ammunition. They weren't meant to hold ground on their own. They were meant to arrive, create chaos, and hold just long enough for heavier elements to follow through the gap they opened. Behind the riders, moving with the formation, was a vehicle equipped with electronic warfare systems. This was the unit's invisible shield. Its job was to broadcast jamming signals across the frequencies most commonly used by Ukrainian FPV drones, disrupting the control links between the operators and their aircraft. If the jamming worked, incoming drones would lose their video feeds, drift off course, or simply fall out of the sky before they could reach their targets. Further back still, a short-range air defense platform followed. This system was designed to engage aerial threats directly, providing a physical layer of protection if the electronic layer failed. Together, the three elements created what should have been a survivable formation: speed in front to cross the gap, electronic warfare in the middle to blind the drones, air defense in the rear to kill anything that got through. The plan depended on all three layers working simultaneously during a window that would last less than 5 minutes. That was the crossing time. 5 minutes from the tree line to the Ukrainian positions. 5 minutes where everything had to hold together. It started falling apart before the first engine revved. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones had been operating over the wider area for hours before the assault began. These weren't the small FPV systems used for attack. These were longer endurance platforms flying at altitudes that made them nearly invisible from the ground, equipped with thermal and optical sensors that could distinguish a human figure from several kilometers away. They weren't looking for this specific unit. They were looking for anything that moved. The preparation phase of any assault generates signatures. Vehicles clustering in tree lines. Heat sources appearing where none existed an hour before. Radio traffic increasing on certain frequencies. Patterns of movement that shift from random to organized. Any one of these things might be meaningless. Together, they paint a picture that experienced operators know how to read. The Russian unit, as it gathered and organized itself under the cover of trees and vegetation, generated exactly these signatures. The thermal bloom of 15 motorcycle engines warming up in a confined area was visible from above. The movement of personnel between vehicles created a pattern that looked nothing like normal activity. The electronic warfare system, even before it was fully active, emitted signals that could be detected and categorized. The Ukrainian side did not react immediately. This is an important detail because it reveals something about how the defense had evolved. There was no scramble, no panic, no rushed launch of every available drone. Instead, the reconnaissance platforms continued to observe. Operators on the ground recorded the formation's composition, estimated its likely direction of advance based on terrain analysis, and began coordinating a response that would unfold in stages. FPV teams positioned at various points behind the front line were alerted. Drone batteries were checked. Control frequencies were confirmed. Flight paths were plotted that would allow the attack drones to approach from angles the electronic warfare system would have the most difficulty covering. All of this happened while the Russian riders were still under the trees, checking their weapons and waiting for the order to move. When the formation finally launched, it did so with confidence born from the belief that speed was its primary defense. The motorcycles surged forward out of the tree line and onto the exposed ground, engines screaming, riders hunched low over their handlebars. The electronic warfare vehicle powered up to full output, flooding the surrounding frequencies with noise designed to sever any drone control link within range. The air defense system activated its radar and began scanning for airborne threats. Everything was working as planned. From the ground, the sensation would have been one of controlled violence. Wind, noise, vibration, the road blurring beneath the wheels. Each rider focused on the path ahead, maintaining spacing, avoiding ruts and debris. At 120 km per hour on broken terrain, a moment's distraction could mean a crash. There was no time to look up, no time to scan the sky. The riders trusted their support systems to handle the threats they couldn't see. From above, the picture was entirely different. The formation appeared as a line of bright thermal signatures moving along a predictable corridor at a consistent speed. The path itself was constrained by terrain. Previous vehicle traffic had worn tracks into the ground, and the areas on either side were soft, uneven, or mined. The motorcycles had no choice but to follow the established route, which meant their path could be predicted with a high degree of accuracy for the entire length of the crossing. The electronic warfare emissions were detected and catalogued almost immediately. Ukrainian operators noted the jamming patterns and shifted their control frequencies in response. This wasn't a theoretical countermeasure. It was a practiced one. The ongoing drone war in Ukraine had given both sides months of experience in the electronic warfare cycle, where jammers and operators constantly adapted to each other's techniques. The Russian system was broadcasting on frequencies that had been effective weeks earlier. The Ukrainian drone teams had already adjusted. The first phase of the attack was not aimed at the motorcycles. A single FPV drone, flying low and using the terrain to mask its approach, corrected its path through the weakened jamming field and struck the electronic warfare vehicle. The approach was fast and direct, leaving almost no time for the crew to react. The explosion destroyed the system and killed or wounded everyone aboard. In a single moment, the formation's invisible shield vanished. The effect was not immediately visible to the riders ahead. They were still moving, still focused on the ground in front of them, still counting on protection that no longer existed. But the operators controlling the Ukrainian drones noticed the change instantly. Signal interference dropped. Video feeds sharpened. Control inputs became more responsive. The space above the formation, which had been contested just seconds before, was now open. This is where the engagement shifted from a targeted strike to a systematic destruction. With the jamming removed, the FPV teams had clear access to the entire corridor. Drones that had been holding at the edges of the jamming envelope now moved inward, adjusting their altitudes and approach angles to cover the full length of the formation. Some climbed higher to maintain overview. Others dropped low and accelerated toward specific targets. The coordination was not perfect in a textbook sense, but it didn't need to be. Each operator could see clearly, each drone responded to its controls, and the targets below were moving in a straight line at predictable speed. The first motorcycle was hit from above. The drone came down at a steep angle, and the rider had no warning. The impact destroyed the bike and sent debris across the narrow path. At 120 km per hour, the riders behind had less than a second to react. One swerved and lost control, crashing into the soft ground beside the track. Another braked hard and was struck from behind by the rider following. A third managed to avoid the wreckage but slowed dramatically, becoming an almost stationary target in the middle of open ground. The chain reaction was catastrophic. Within seconds, the tight formation that had been the unit's strength became its destruction. Motorcycles collided, flipped, and scattered across the corridor. Riders were thrown from their bikes, hitting the ground at speeds that caused severe injuries even without any enemy action. The neat line of advancing soldiers became a chaotic spread of wrecked machines, injured men, and burning fuel. The drones did not pause. As the formation broke apart, the attack shifted from sequential strikes to simultaneous engagement across multiple points. One drone hit a motorcycle that had come to a stop near the edge of the path. Another targeted a rider who was trying to drag himself toward a shallow depression in the ground. A third struck the air defense vehicle in the rear of the formation, which had been attempting to track the incoming drones but could not acquire targets fast enough. The system's radar was designed for larger, higher-flying threats. The FPV drones approaching at low altitude, high speed, and with minimal radar cross-section fell below the engagement envelope. The vehicle was destroyed without ever firing a shot. The entire air defense layer, the final protection the unit had, was gone, and it had never engaged a single target. Survivors began abandoning their motorcycles and running. Some moved toward the nearest tree line, several hundred meters away across open ground. Others crawled into ruts and depressions, pressing themselves into the earth and hoping the drones would lose track of them. A few tried to continue forward on foot, driven by training or desperation toward the objective that was still somewhere ahead. None of these responses worked the way they would have in a previous era of warfare. Running toward a tree line that is 300 meters away takes roughly 90 seconds for a fit soldier carrying equipment. A drone flying at 60 kilometers per hour can cover the same distance in 18 seconds. The math is simple and brutal. A man running in the open cannot outpace a system that moves 3 times faster and can see him from above. The drones tracked the runners, adjusted their paths, and closed in. Crawling into a depression provided concealment from ground-level observation, but almost none from a thermal sensor looking straight down. The heat of a human body against cool ground is as visible as a flashlight in a dark room. Individual strikes continued across the engagement area for several more minutes. Each one was small, precise, and final. A single drone carrying a modified munition would identify a target, adjust its approach, and impact within seconds. The cost of each strike was measured in hundreds of dollars. The cost of each target was measured in a trained soldier, his equipment, and the months of preparation that had gone into his deployment. When reports of the disaster reached the units positioned behind the assault force, the immediate instinct was to push support forward. This is a standard military response. When a lead element is in trouble, you reinforce. You send vehicles, you send medics, you send firepower. You try to stabilize the situation and recover what you can. A small group of armored vehicles and transport elements began moving toward the corridor. Their intent was to reach the site of the collapse, recover wounded, and potentially continue the assault if enough combat power remained. This decision was made quickly, under pressure, and without full awareness of what was waiting above the route they intended to use. The Ukrainian reconnaissance drones that had observed the original assault were still in position. They had not returned to base or shifted to another sector. They were orbiting the same area, and when the new movement began, they detected it immediately. The composition was different, heavier vehicles, slower speed, a more cautious approach, but the direction was the same. The path was the same, and the vulnerability was the same. Additional FPV drones were launched to intercept the reinforcement column before it could reach the engagement zone. The operators did not need to develop a new plan. The corridor had already been mapped during the first attack. The terrain features were known. The approach angles had been tested. Everything that had been learned in the previous engagement was applied again, faster and with less uncertainty. The lead vehicle of the reinforcement column was struck as it attempted to enter the same stretch of road where the motorcycle formation had been destroyed. The drone approached from an angle that put it outside the vehicle's field of observation and impacted near the front, disabling the vehicle and blocking the path. The effect was immediate and familiar. The vehicle behind slowed, tried to maneuver around, and was struck by a second drone. The column stopped. What followed was not a repeat of the motorcycle engagement. It was slower, more deliberate, and in some ways more revealing. The armored vehicles had protection that the motorcycles did not. They could survive near misses and minor shrapnel, but they were also slower, larger, and easier to track. The drones adjusted their tactics, targeting vulnerable points like engine compartments, turret rings, and exposed optics. Each strike was calculated, and each impact degraded the column's ability to continue. The reinforcement attempt did not reach the original site. It stalled, took losses, and eventually withdrew. The corridor remained under Ukrainian control from above, and any further attempt to push through would have faced the same reception. The decision to pull back was not a collapse. It was a recognition that the conditions in that space had changed fundamentally, and that pushing more forces into it would only add to the losses without changing the outcome. Back at the original site, the debris field told the full story. Burned motorcycles lay scattered across several hundred meters of dirt road. The electronic warfare vehicle was a blackened hull. The air defense platform sat motionless, its radar antenna frozen at whatever angle it had been scanning when the final strike landed. Bodies and equipment marked the points where riders had fallen or tried to escape. The entire engagement, from the first drone strike to the last, had lasted roughly 3 minutes. 3 minutes. That number matters because it represents something that has no precedent in the history of ground warfare. An organized assault force, supported by electronic warfare and air defense, was identified, targeted, and destroyed in less time than it takes to boil water. The attackers never reached their objective. They never engaged the defenders. They never fired a single shot at the positions they were supposed to assault. They were eliminated entirely within the space between the two front lines, a space that used to be called no man's land for a very different reason. The implications run deeper than one failed attack on one dirt road in one sector of the Ukrainian front. What happened here is a data point in a trend that has been building for months. The open ground between opposing positions, which military doctrine has traditionally treated as a space to be crossed quickly, is becoming a permanent kill zone monitored by systems that never blink, never tire, and never look away. Speed was supposed to be the answer to this problem. The logic was sound within its own framework. If drones need time to find and engage a target, then moving faster reduces the time available for engagement. Motorcycles offered the fastest possible transit across open ground. The theory was tested, and it failed. Not because the motorcycles were too slow, but because the detection and engagement cycle on the other side was faster still. The drones were already in position before the assault began. The targeting was already complete before the first rider entered the corridor. The strikes were already planned before the electronic warfare system was destroyed. Speed bought the attackers nothing because the defenders had already done their work. This creates a problem that neither side has fully solved. If armor can't survive because it's too visible, and speed can't survive because detection outpaces movement, then what does a ground assault look like in this environment? The old answers, suppression, smoke, artillery preparation, still have value, but they don't address the fundamental issue. A drone operator sitting in a basement 5 kilometers behind the line, watching a thermal feed and holding a control stick, doesn't care about suppressive fire landing on a trench he isn't in. Smoke obscures visual sensors but not thermal ones. Artillery can destroy known drone launch positions, but new ones can be established in minutes with equipment that fits in a backpack. The motorcycle assault was an attempt to solve this problem through pure velocity. Its failure suggests that the solution, if one exists, lies somewhere else. Perhaps in electronic warfare systems that are more advanced and more distributed, not concentrated in a single vehicle that becomes the obvious first target. Perhaps in counter-drone systems that can engage small, fast-moving targets at low altitude, a capability that most existing air defense platforms were never designed to provide. Perhaps in tactics that haven't been invented yet, approaches that accept the reality of persistent aerial surveillance and find ways to operate within it rather than trying to outrun it. Or perhaps the answer is that some ground can no longer be taken by direct assault at all. That the age of crossing open terrain under fire, which has defined infantry warfare since the invention of the machine gun, has entered a new phase where the fire comes from everywhere, sees everything, and costs almost nothing to deliver. 15 soldiers rode into that corridor believing they could cross it in less than 5 minutes. 3 minutes later, the corridor was a graveyard, and the reinforcements sent to help them were already turning back. The dirt road is quiet now. The drones have moved on to watch the next sector, the next tree line, the next cluster of heat signatures that might mean someone else is about to try. Nobody has tried that road again.